are talking the Resonator, Miskatonic U for University, in case you were wondering. And this one is written and directed by William Butler, and is actually a sequel to the 1986 movie From Beyond, which was, of course, of a Lovecraft story. So here we have a follow-on in 2021, and it follows the son of the character originally played by genre favourite Jeffrey Combs in the original 1986 movie. And here the son is played by Dane Oliver, who plays Crawford Tillinghast. You've also got a recognisable face in the form of Michael Parry, who's really the kind of the star power in this movie. Now, interestingly, this film's actually only just over an hour long and was actually kind of split into two parts on Full Moon's kind of streaming service. Now, the story focuses on a group of university students, one of which, the son of I say, the character from the first movie, has recreated his father's work in the form of this machine, which can peer into other dimensions and kind of see the future, perhaps, and maybe it might accidentally bring some kind of creatures back with it. And of course, it does. And obviously, things kind of start to go wrong. You've also got a rival in the human form, played by Michael Parry's character, who is a kind of a jealous contemporary as a kind of university from his father's work. So what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So it appears as we've seen previously in the kind of the Castle Freak reboot, there is an attempt here to have a kind of like shared universe between a lot of these kind of like these older films, some of which appear to be reboots, some of which appear to be sequels. And this one does kind of set out some kind of connections with the kind of the Re-Animator series, as did the Castle Freak reboot. So what can we say that works in this movie's favour? I have to say, I was a huge fan of the Full Moon movies back in the kind of the 80s and 90s, and this movie genuinely has that same kind of like feeling of those Full Moon productions in the kind of its classic era. And I used to love those movies because they were always somewhat kind of campy and schlocky, but they had real reverence for the kind of like the material that they were producing, and you know, they were kind of a lot of fun, albeit kind of low budget. And obviously they're kind of a cast of characters and actors that used to kind of you see over multiple films. And I feel this is very representative of those kind of Full Moon movies of the you know, the kind of the past. So that was great. Our main sort of character, who is, as I say, the kind of the son of the, you know, the character from the original Beyond movie, does a pretty good job here of making a you know, a kind of somewhat eccentric sort of character, much like his father. But still kind of a likeable one that you can kind of get behind. And again, it will kind of remind you, you know, of, you know, Jeffrey Combs in that kind of original movie, despite this being obviously a much more kind of recent one. The movie is kind of does have an element of fun, and it has a little bit of a kinky element too. Some of the kind of the creatures that come out, you know, wouldn't look out of place in a kind of like a hentai anime, you know, film or something along the lines of that. It definitely has a kind of like weird kind of kinky-ish kind of feel to it in kind of some circumstances. Although it's not particularly necessarily explicit, you can see it's kind of where it's kind of heading. I suppose in much in the same way that, you know, it was said that Geiger's original kind of designs for the Alien movie were somewhat kind of, you know, kinky as well. And only an hour, obviously, this movie is relatively kind of like well paced and kind of gets kind of straight to it, with a very kind of simple and easy to follow plot. So let's transition into what does not work. It's a very simple and easy to follow plot without kind of really much else kind of going on, I have to say. Partly because of its, obviously, it is so kind of like such a short movie, it's barely would be considered a feature if I'm completely honest. And as such, the story is pretty slim in regards to any kind of real surprises or twists or anything like that. It's more or less a straight kind of A to B storyline with somewhat kind of like cliche kind of characters and no real surprises in regards to what's going to kind of happen here. I have to say as well, the movie does hint towards, obviously, the larger universe, but I kind of have mixed feelings about it, to be honest with you. I don't know if it's particularly a good idea to try and kind of like have all these things kind of happening in the same universe. It is a little bit fun, but I feel it kind of almost take away a little bit from those kind of original films to a certain degree. I think probably the most common complaint I suspect with this particular adaptation is its really poor special effects. It genuinely seems like they've just thrown together whatever they've had kind of like laying around in their warehouse to have these kind of like these creature effects, because they look pretty poor. They've obviously taken the decision to stay away from CGI, which, you know, is a good thing in a lot of instances. But what we get instead is some really kind of like styrofoam looking kind of like creature features, and really not a particularly good level of effects. In fact, I have to say, it kind of, going back to what I said about this looking like and feeling like a kind of a full moon movie of old, it kind of has those same special effects, if not a little bit worse, I have to say. The effects here are kind of quite disappointing. And I have to say, some of the kind of the characters here are a little bit kind of hammy and kind of cliche here. And there's just not a lot to this film. It just ultimately feels a little bit of unnecessary, if I'm honest. It doesn't really, you know, the From Beyond movie, you know, was kind of a little bit of a cult classic. And this feels just a little bit of a generic follow-on. It doesn't really feel like it's moving the story in any particular kind of like interesting kind of direction. And just kind of feels like a very kind of like run-of-the-mill, you know, extension to the story. I don't even want to say sequel, because it's kind of just like, there's very little plot to it, and it just feels like an extension of the story rather than a kind of like a next chapter necessarily. I think fans of the original would be interested potentially, or those of you who kind of like more cosmic horror, but it's really just not that interesting at the end of the day. It's fun to a certain degree, and I think you can kind of watch this with you know, rose-tinted glasses and kind of have reverence for the kind of the retro kind of feel this movie has, and the way it kind of brings in certain characters from other H.P. Lovecraft adaptations, which I won't spoil for you, particularly at the end. But nonetheless, I've got to say, it was a little bit underwhelming. I'll give this one a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.